Everyone needs to see this court order immediately, I announced calmly, my voice slicing through the tension in the Blackwell Industries executive boardroom. Nathan, my soon-to-be ex-husband of 7 years, froze mid-sentence, his Mont Blanc pen suspended over the quarterly report he'd been smugly presenting. His father, CEO Richard Blackwell, glared at me with the same contemptuous expression he'd worn when refusing to help with the mountain of debt Nathan had left me with just 3 months earlier. "What exactly are you doing here, Olivia?" Richard demanded, his voice laced with ice. "Security was supposed to escort you from the premises." I smiled slightly as I placed the sealed court documents on the gleaming mahogany table. "Actually, as of 9 o'clock this morning, I have every right to be here." Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was exhausted but running on pure adrenaline. The stunned expressions around the conference table made every sleepless night worth it. Nathan's face had drained of all color as he stared at the court order before him. His younger brother, James, exchanged alarmed glances with the company's financial officer. The board members shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to react to this unexpected interruption. "This is ridiculous," Richard Blackwell sputtered, not even bothering to open the documents. At 63, he radiated authority in his tailored Italian suit, steel gray hair perfectly styled, and cold blue eyes, the same eyes Nathan had inherited. "Whatever scheme you've concocted, it won't work. You have no place in this company, or this family." "I suggest you read the court order, Richard," I replied evenly. Judge Harmon was quite thorough in her ruling. Nathan finally found his voice. "Olivia, what have you done?" he demanded, though the tremor in his words betrayed his growing panic. "Nothing compared to what you did to me," I said quietly. "I'm just making sure everyone sees the consequences of your actions." The company secretary entered with the morning coffee service, stopping abruptly when she sensed the tension. "Should I come back later?" she asked uncertainly. "No need." "Catherine," I said, recognizing her from previous company functions, "everyone will want to be fully alert for what comes next." Around the table, executives began opening the sealed envelopes I'd had delivered by courier minutes before my arrival. The color drained from more faces as they silently read the contents. Nathan frantically flipped through the pages, his breathing growing shallow. "This can't be legal," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I assure you it's completely legal," I replied. "And long overdue." Richard Blackwell snatched the document from his son's trembling hands. As he scanned the pages, his expression transformed from dismissive anger to utter disbelief. "Before anyone else arrives," I continued calmly, "I think you should all know that effective immediately, I'm the court-appointed trustee overseeing Blackwell Industries' reorganization and debt restructuring. In simple terms, I'm now your boss. If this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow's video will reveal how someone else turned their rock-bottom moment into ultimate victory. My name is Olivia Chen, though for 7 years I was Olivia Blackwell. At 34, I had believed I was living a charmed life, married to Nathan Blackwell, whose family owned Blackwell Industries, a successful manufacturing conglomerate with offices across 3 states. I had a promising career as a corporate financial investigator, a beautiful colonial home in Westchester County, and what I thought was a loving marriage. Nathan and I met during my final year of business school at Columbia. I was there on a scholarship and student loans, working nights at a Manhattan restaurant to cover living expenses. He was completing his MBA after joining the family business straight out of his undergraduate program at Yale. We connected at a financial ethics conference where I was presenting research on corporate fraud detection. While most attendees seemed bored by my presentation, Nathan asked thoughtful questions about investigative methodologies and pattern recognition in financial irregularities. "You think differently from everyone I know," he told me as we shared coffee afterward. "Most people in my world just want to know how to work around regulations, not strengthen them." Our courtship was a whirlwind of Broadway shows, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and late-night conversations about building businesses with integrity. I was drawn to his apparent desire to reform his family's old-school company with more transparent practices. When he proposed 6 months later at the top of the Empire State Building with his grandmother's emerald ring, I accepted without hesitation. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but love has a way of blinding us to red flags. Our wedding revealed the first glimpses of trouble ahead. My vision had been a small ceremony in the botanical gardens, with close friends and meaningful traditions. Instead, Richard and Eleanor Blackwell, Nathan's parents, presented a comprehensive wedding plan before I could even begin looking at venues. "The Blackwells always marry at St. Patrick's Cathedral," Eleanor informed me at our first planning meeting, her pearls gleaming as she slid a leather portfolio across the table. "We've already spoken with Father Michael about available dates." I looked to Nathan, hoping for support. He squeezed my hand under the table but said, "Mom has planned dozens of successful family events, Liv. She knows what works." Richard. Blackwell folded his Wall Street Journal with deliberate precision. "This isn't just a personal milestone, son. It's a business necessity. The governor will attend, along with our major investors. This wedding announces your future leadership in the company." In the end, we compromised. Their church, but my choice of music. Their country club reception, but my preferred menu. It was the first of many compromises that, in retrospect, always bent toward the Blackwell family preferences and connections. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The real problems began after our honeymoon in Bali, when I returned to my position at Hamilton & Frost, a respected financial investigation firm specializing in corporate fraud detection. I had worked diligently to build my reputation there, but Eleanor seemed baffled by my career choice. "It's unprecedented," she remarked during Sunday dinner at their Westchester estate. "Blackwell wives traditionally manage the family's charitable foundation." "Olivia loves her work, Mother," Nathan said, though I noticed his defense lacked conviction. Richard barely looked up from his roast beef. "It creates an odd impression when your expertise is finding corporate wrongdoing, yet you won't join our compliance team to ensure our own house is in order." These subtle comments multiplied over the years. At family gatherings, James would casually mention clients who had fired my firm after negative findings. Eleanor would forget to include my career milestones in family holiday letters that detailed everyone else's achievements. At dinner parties, I found myself seated increasingly far from Nathan and key family members, relegated to conversations with the peripheral guests, while important discussions happened at the other end of the table. Holiday gifts became another way to reinforce my outsider status. While James's wife received thoughtful, personalized presents reflecting her interests, I'd receive generic gift cards with notes saying, "We weren't sure what you'd like," in Eleanor's elegant script, despite having been part of the family for years. Nathan initially defended me, but his support weakened with each confrontation until it disappeared entirely. He started working longer hours at Blackwell Industries, where he'd been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. His participation in our marriage diminished as his immersion in the family business deepened. The most painful shift was how he gradually adopted his family's dismissive attitude toward my career. "Wouldn't it just be easier to join Blackwell?" he'd ask when I was preparing for court testimony in a major fraud case. "You could head compliance, make your own hours, be available for more important things." "Like what, Nathan?" I'd asked once, exhaustion making me direct. "Family obligations, our future, the Blackwell legacy," he'd replied, genuinely perplexed by my resistance. I tried explaining how I'd worked through business school waiting tables, How I'd built my reputation through meticulous investigation and expert testimony. How my work gave me purpose beyond a comfortable lifestyle. He'd listen with decreasing patience. "No one's saying stop being a financial investigator," he'd say. "Just do it for us instead of strangers." What he never understood was the fundamental difference between being valued for your skills and being tolerated because of who you married. In the Blackwell world, I would always be Nathan's wife first, my professional identity secondary at best. My college friend Zoe recognized the pattern before I allowed myself to see it. Over lunch one rainy Tuesday, she asked directly, "Are you happy, Liv?" "Of course," I answered automatically. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because every time you mention Nathan or his family, you get this look like you're bracing for impact," she observed. "And you're starting to shrink yourself to fit into their world." I dismissed her concerns, but her words lingered. Over the following months, I noticed how I'd begun making myself smaller to avoid conflict, rescheduling dinners with friends to accommodate last-minute Blackwell functions, dressing more conservatively around my in-laws, speaking less in family discussions, downplaying my accomplishments to avoid appearing competitive with Nathan. The annual company gala became the breaking point. Blackwell Industries had gathered at their Manhattan headquarters for their 50th anniversary celebration, a formal affair with photographers capturing images for their investor materials and industry publications. As we assembled for photos on the grand staircase, Eleanor assessed the grouping with a critical eye. "Olivia, dear," she said, using my full name as she always did when issuing directives disguised as requests, "would you mind stepping aside for the official company photos? We'll do some casual ones with extended family afterward." I looked to Nathan, expecting him to object. Instead, he avoided my gaze, moving closer to his father. "It's just for the annual report, Liv," he murmured. "Don't make it an issue." I stepped aside, watching as the Blackwell family posed without me, Nathan's arm around his mother instead of his wife. The casual photos Eleanor had promised never materialized as the evening progressed. That night, as we drove home in silence, Nathan finally spoke. "You're overreacting. It was just a photo for the annual report." "It's never just a photo, Nathan," I replied. "It's 7 years of being treated like an accessory rather than a family member, and you let it happen every time." "The quarterly board meeting is next week," he said, changing the subject. "I need you to be there to support me, not creating drama over perceived slights." "Perceived?" I repeated. But he had already turned away, ending the discussion. What Nathan didn't know, what none of the Blackwells knew, was that Gerald Blackwell, Nathan's grandfather and founder of Blackwell Industries, had reached out to me professionally 3 months earlier. At 86, Gerald was physically frail but mentally sharp. Though officially retired for a decade, he still held significant company shares and maintained an honorary board position. I had met him at various family functions, but had never had substantive conversations with him until he requested a private meeting at my office. His assistant drove him there rather than having me visit the family estate, which immediately struck me as a deliberate choice. "You're probably wondering why I've come to you instead of using the family's regular financial advisors," he said once we were alone, his voice thin but determined. The thought had crossed my mind, I admitted, maintaining professional composure despite my surprise. "I've been watching you for years," he said. "How you've conducted yourself despite Richard and Eleanor's behavior. You have integrity, Olivia. That's increasingly rare in our circles." Gerald explained that he had growing concerns about Blackwell Industries' financial management under his son's leadership. What had begun as a respected manufacturing business had become increasingly leveraged with questionable accounting practices and risky acquisitions. "I built this company to create quality products and sustainable jobs," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "Not to become a house of cards built on debt and financial engineering. Somewhere, the purpose has been lost." Over several private meetings, Gerald shared his concerns and hopes for the company's future. He asked for my professional help to investigate the company's true financial position and potentially restructure his holdings to protect both his legacy and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. "Won't this create significant conflict with your son and the current management team?" I asked. Gerald's smile was grim. "That's precisely why I need someone outside their influence. Someone who understands financial forensics and corporate governance, but isn't beholden to Richard's agenda or intimidated by the Blackwell name." I agreed to help him, establishing a clear professional relationship documented with proper engagement letters and confidentiality agreements. We began reviewing years of financial statements, acquisition documents, loan agreements, and internal audits. What we discovered was deeply troubling: a complex web of shell companies, hidden liabilities, and accounting manipulations that masked the company's increasingly precarious financial position. "This is worse than I feared," Gerald said when I presented my preliminary findings. "Richard has been gambling with the company's future, and the board has been asleep at the wheel." Working with Gerald's estate attorney, we developed a comprehensive plan to protect the company from potential bankruptcy while creating accountability for the current management. The strategy was legally sound and ethically necessary, but would be explosive when revealed. I knew helping Gerald might end my marriage, but as a financial investigator, my professional ethics demanded I proceed. As someone who had been systematically marginalized by the Blackwell family, I also recognized the irony of being the one to potentially save their company from their own mismanagement. I didn't tell Nathan about any of this. Professional confidentiality gave me the perfect justification for my meetings with Gerald, which I scheduled during business hours and documented meticulously. Nathan, increasingly absorbed in company matters, never questioned my busy schedule. Then came the crisis that would change everything. 3 months before the boardroom confrontation, Nathan returned home unusually late one evening. I was working in my home office when he entered, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk," he said, loosening his tie and avoiding my eyes. The conversation that followed revealed a devastating reality. Nathan had been gambling with significant amounts of money, both ours and funds improperly borrowed from Blackwell Industries. His father had discovered the misappropriation and the mounting gambling debts. Rather than facing legal consequences, Nathan had agreed to his father's solution: liquidate our joint assets to repay the company, file for divorce to protect the Blackwell name, and accept a temporary reassignment to the company's international division. "You're leaving me?" I asked, struggling to process the multiple betrayals happening simultaneously. "It's just for a year or two," he said, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad thinks it's best for everyone. You'll get a generous settlement." "Did you even try to fight for us? For me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "This is the only way to avoid scandal, possibly criminal charges," he replied. "Dad says it's damage control." Within weeks, our joint accounts were emptied, our home was listed for sale, and divorce papers were delivered to my office. The generous settlement Nathan had promised materialized as a fraction of what I was entitled to, with a confidentiality agreement that would prevent me from disclosing any Blackwell family or business matters. Richard Blackwell called me personally to explain the situation. "Nathan made mistakes, but we're handling it internally. Sign the papers, take the settlement, and move on gracefully. Fighting will only embarrass you and damage Nathan's future." The calculated coldness of it all was stunning. After 7 years of marriage, I was being discarded to protect the Blackwell name and Nathan's position in the company. What they hadn't counted on was my profession. I recognized financial manipulation when I saw it. The settlement paperwork contained subtle traps that would leave me responsible for debts Nathan had accumulated in our joint names while giving up rights to marital assets. I declined their offer and hired Grace Winters, a formidable divorce attorney known for handling high-profile cases. They're counting on intimidating you into a quick, quiet settlement, Grace observed after reviewing their proposal. Classic. Wealthy family playbook. 2 days after I formally rejected their settlement offer, Gerald Blackwell was hospitalized with pneumonia. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he passed away a week later. At the funeral, I maintained a respectful distance, aware of the Blackwells' desire to minimize my presence in family matters. Richard delivered a polished eulogy that emphasized Gerald's business acumen, but omitted his dedication to employees and ethical practices. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Gerald and I had completed our investigation and restructuring plan shortly before his hospitalization. He had updated his will and trust arrangements, filed key documents with the court under seal, and put in motion a series of legal actions that would activate upon his death. 3 weeks after Gerald's funeral, as the Blackwells were still fighting, my divorce counterclaims, Judge Sandra Harmon called an emergency hearing regarding Gerald Blackwell's estate. I attended at the request of Gerald's personal attorney, while Richard, Nathan, and James appeared with the company's legal team, clearly irritated by this unexpected complication during their efforts to force my compliance in the divorce. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harmon revealed the contents of Gerald's final legal actions. A comprehensive forensic accounting of Blackwell Industries showing evidence of mismanagement, self-dealing, and potential securities violations. A restructuring plan to save the company from its mounting hidden debt. And most shockingly, the appointment of an independent trustee to oversee the company's reorganization. Given Ms. Chen's professional qualifications in financial forensics, her intimate knowledge of the issues at hand, and the deceased's explicit trust in her abilities, the court confirms her appointment as trustee with full oversight authority. Effective immediately, Judge Harmon announced. Nathan's face drained of all color. Richard stood up, sputtering objections that Judge Harmon calmly overruled. The evidence of mismanagement is substantial, Mr. Blackwell. Your father's final wishes were explicit and legally binding. Ms. Chen will have full access to all company records, authority to implement necessary financial controls, and veto power over major decisions until the company's stability is restored. This is preposterous, Richard protested. She's in the middle of divorcing my son. This is clearly a vindictive ploy. On the contrary, the judge replied, the timing of your son's divorce filing, immediately after his grandfather began investigating company finances, suggests the vindictive action may have originated with your family, Mr. Blackwell. As we left the courtroom, Nathan grabbed my arm. What have you done? He demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. I didn't do this, Nathan, I replied truthfully. Your grandfather did. He saw what was happening to his company and took steps to save it, from your father and unfortunately from you. Now, walking into the Blackwell Industries boardroom with the court order in hand, I was completing Gerald's final request. Save my company from my family if necessary, but save my family from themselves if possible. As board members and executives continued reading the detailed court order, Richard Blackwell's face flushed with fury. This is corporate theft. You've manipulated an old man into giving you control of our company. Your father wasn't manipulated, Richard, I replied calmly. He was devastated to discover what you've done to Blackwell Industries. The company is carrying 3 times more debt than reported to shareholders. Your acquisition strategy has been disastrous. And Nathan's borrowing was the final straw. Nathan looked up from the documents, panic evident in his eyes. You can't possibly understand the complexities of running this business. You'll destroy everything my family has built. Actually, I said, opening my laptop and connecting it to the room's projection system, I understand it better than you think. The screen filled with a detailed financial analysis showing the company's true position, dangerous debt levels, declining cash flow, and alarming discrepancies between internal accounts and public filings. This is only a small sample of what Judge Harmon reviewed, I continued. Gerald spent the last months of his life working to save this company. As trustee, I intend to honor that commitment. The boardroom fell into stunned silence as executives stared at the financial projections on screen. The numbers didn't lie. Blackwell Industries was in far worse shape than anyone besides Richard and a few loyal executives had realized. Years of aggressive acquisitions funded by hidden debt had created a house of cards that was on the verge of collapse. "This meeting is adjourned," Richard Blackwell finally announced, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Ms. Chen, my attorneys, will be contacting yours immediately." "That's your prerogative," I replied, remaining seated as board members gathered their materials. "But Judge Harmon's order is clear. Any major decisions require my approval as trustee, and any attempts to obstruct my access to company information will result in contempt charges." After Richard stormed out, followed by his loyal executives, Nathan lingered behind. The confident, charming man I had married was nowhere to be seen. In his place stood someone I barely recognized, desperate, cornered, afraid. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing my job, Nathan. The job your grandfather hired me to do." "We can work something out," he suggested, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "I know you're angry about the divorce, about the money. We can renegotiate, come to a better arrangement." I studied him for a moment, this man who had once been the center of my world. "This isn't about our divorce or money, Nathan. It's about integrity. Something your grandfather understood, even if you and your father don't." As he left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I remained in the boardroom, taking a moment to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. In a matter of hours, I had gone from being the family outcast to holding the fate of Blackwell Industries in my hands. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in years, I felt completely clear about my purpose. My phone buzzed, with a text from Zoe. "How did it go?" "Exactly as Gerald predicted," I replied. "Shock, denial, then anger. The real work starts tomorrow." I gathered my materials and left the boardroom, nodding politely to Catherine, the company secretary who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "Ms. Chen," she said hesitantly, "for what it's worth, Mr. Gerald always spoke highly of you." Her small gesture of support meant more than she could know. In the ruthlessly hierarchical world of Blackwell Industries, anyone showing me even basic courtesy was taking a risk. "Thank you, Catherine. I have a feeling I'll need allies in the days ahead." As I walked through the executive floor toward the elevator, I felt the stares of employees who had undoubtedly already heard whispers about the boardroom drama. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the hushed atmosphere. I kept my head high, my expression neutral. Whatever they might think of me personally, I was now acting in an official capacity, and I needed to project the confidence and authority that role demanded. The next morning, I arrived at Blackwell Industries at 7:30 a.m., well before most executives would appear. I had deliberately chosen an early start to establish my new office without an audience. Catherine met me in the lobby, keycard in hand. "Mr. Gerald's office has been prepared as you requested," she informed me, leading the way to the executive elevator. "IT has set up your system access according to the court order specifications. Gerald's office, now mine, was located on the top floor with sweeping views of the city. Unlike Richard's sleek, modern executive suite down the hall, Gerald had maintained a more traditional space with warm wood paneling, comfortable leather furniture, and walls lined with photos documenting the company's history. Mr. Gerald never let them redecorate, Catherine explained, noticing my appreciation of the space. He said it helped him remember where the company came from, even as it grew. I set my briefcase on the desk that had once been Gerald's, feeling both the weight of responsibility and a sense of rightness. "Catherine, I'd like to see the personnel files for the executive team and department heads, along with the complete financial records for the past 5 years." "Of course, I've already begun compiling those materials. She hesitated, then added, Ms. Chen, there's something you should know. Mr. Richard instructed IT to restrict your access to certain financial systems, despite the court order. I've documented his instructions as you suggested might be necessary. This confirmed my suspicion that Richard would attempt to obstruct my work from the outset. Thank you for your honesty, Catherine. Please forward that documentation to my attorney and Judge Harmon's office immediately. By 9 a.m., executives began arriving for the emergency meeting I had called. Richard and Nathan were conspicuously absent, a calculated move to undermine my authority. James Blackwell, however, entered the conference room looking uncomfortable but present. My father and brother send their regrets, he offered stiffly, as he took a seat. They had prior commitments that couldn't be rescheduled. That's unfortunate, I replied, as this meeting is mandatory according to the court order, which I made clear in my communication. I nodded to Catherine, who was taking minutes. Please note their absence for the record, and that we'll be forwarding attendance information to Judge Harmon. The meeting was tense but productive. I outlined the company's true financial position, which shocked many executives who had been kept in the dark about the extent of the problems. I then presented the first phase of the restructuring plan, focusing on immediate measures to stabilize cash flow and address the most pressing debt obligations. These changes will be challenging, I acknowledged, but they're necessary to prevent bankruptcy. Gerald Blackwell built this company to last generations, not to collapse under the weight of financial mismanagement. After the meeting, James approached me hesitantly. Unlike Nathan, who had always embraced the spotlight, James was quieter, more analytical, content to work behind the scenes in operations rather than corporate strategy. I knew things weren't great, he said, but I had no idea we were this close to the edge. How did it get this bad without anyone raising alarms? Your father compartmentalized information, I explained. The complete financial picture was available to very few people, all loyal to Richard. It's a common tactic in companies heading toward trouble. Keep each department focused on their specific metrics without seeing the whole. James nodded slowly. And Nathan? How involved was he in all this? I considered my answer carefully. Despite everything, Nathan was still his brother. He knew enough to know things weren't right. Whether he understood the full extent is something you'd have to ask him. He's been gambling again, hasn't he? James asked quietly. That's why Dad shipped him off to divorce you so quickly. The question surprised me. I hadn't realized James knew about Nathan's gambling issues. That's part of it, I confirmed. But there's more. We should talk privately, James. There are things you need to know as a family member and company executive. That afternoon, Richard Blackwell's attorneys filed an emergency motion challenging my appointment as trustee. As Gerald had predicted, they argued that my pending divorce from Nathan created an irreconcilable conflict of interest that should disqualify me from the position. Grace Winters, my attorney, called with the news. It's exactly what we anticipated, she reassured me. Judge Harmon has already scheduled a hearing for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, your appointment stands. That evening, as I was reviewing financial documents in Gerald's office, Eleanor Blackwell appeared unannounced. Catherine had left for the day, and the executive floor was nearly deserted. I'd like a word, Eleanor announced, not bothering with pleasantries as she closed the door behind her. I gestured to the chair across from me. Please, sit down. Eleanor remained standing, surveying the office with barely disguised displeasure. I see you've made yourself comfortable in Gerald's space. It's the trustee's office now, I corrected gently. What can I do for you, Eleanor? You can stop this vindictive charade, she replied, her voice cold. Whatever you think my husband and son have done, destroying our family's company isn't the answer. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. I'm not destroying the company, Eleanor, I'm trying to save it. The financial mismanagement under Richard's leadership has brought Blackwell Industries to the brink of collapse. Gerald recognized that, which is why he took action. Gerald was old and confused, she dismissed. You manipulated him in his final months. Is that what Richard told you? I asked. Because the court-appointed medical experts who evaluated Gerald throughout our work together found him to be exceptionally clear-minded. His detailed notes on the company's problems demonstrate remarkable lucidity. Eleanor's composure faltered slightly. What exactly do you want, Olivia? Money? A better divorce settlement? Name your price, and let's end this unnecessary drama. Her assumption that everything could be reduced to a financial transaction was so typical of the Blackwell worldview that I almost pitied her inability to see beyond it. What I want is to fulfill my professional and ethical obligations, I explained. Gerald entrusted me with saving this company, not just for the family, but for the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on it. That's not something I can put a price on. You never understood our world, Eleanor said, shaking her head. Never understood what it means to be a Blackwell. Perhaps not, I agreed. But I understand what it means to have integrity, even when it's difficult. Gerald understood that too. After Eleanor left, I sat in the growing darkness of the office, memories flooding back of how my relationship with Nathan had begun and ultimately unraveled. The Blackwells had always been a package deal. Loving Nathan meant accepting his family's values, priorities, and perspectives. For years, I had tried to belong without completely surrendering my identity and principles. In the end, when forced to choose between me and his family's expectations, Nathan had never hesitated. Our early days together had been filled with such promise. I remembered our third date, when Nathan took me to a small jazz club in Harlem, rather than the upscale Manhattan venues he typically frequented. I want to go somewhere real, he'd explained. Somewhere that isn't about being seen or making connections. That night, listening to incredible music in a cramped, authentic space so different from the Blackwell world, I'd believed Nathan truly wanted something different from his family's calculated existence. He'd spoken passionately about modernizing Blackwell Industries, making it more transparent, more ethical, more focused on innovation than mere profit. My father built on my grandfather's foundation, he'd told me, but he's stuck in old patterns. I want to take the company somewhere new. I believed him then, believed in his vision and his courage to pursue it. When he introduced me to his family, I'd naively thought they would appreciate his choice of a partner with strong ethical convictions and professional accomplishments. Someone who could contribute to that new direction. Instead, they saw me as a complication, an outsider who didn't understand their ways. Over time, I watched as Nathan's talk of reform faded, replaced by his father's priorities and perspectives. The transformation was gradual but relentless. His language shifted from changing the company to preserving the legacy. His ethical concerns gave way to pragmatic acceptance of how things are done. His defense of my independence weakened until it disappeared entirely. The pattern in our marriage mirrored so many other aspects of Nathan's life. Initial enthusiasm for challenging the status quo, followed by the path of least resistance. His gambling had followed the same trajectory, beginning as occasional recreation during our early dating days, then escalating to a secret compulsion he hid even from me. By the time Gerald approached me professionally, my marriage was already a hollow facade. I maintained appearances at family functions while Nathan worked late, canceled plans, and grew increasingly distant. Looking back, I wondered if he had already begun misappropriating funds by then, already setting in motion the financial deception that would eventually lead to our divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Blackwells had consistently undervalued my professional skills and ethical standards, the very qualities that now placed me in a position to determine their company's future. Gerald alone had recognized what the rest of the family dismissed. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize. Olivia Chen, I answered. Ms. Chen, this is Henry Dawson. The name was familiar. One of Blackwell Industries, largest investors and a longtime friend of the family. I was hoping we might meet tomorrow to discuss the situation at Blackwell. Of course, Mr. Dawson. My schedule is quite full with the court hearing in the morning, but I could meet you at 2 p.m. That would be acceptable. And Ms. Chen? I'd appreciate discretion regarding our meeting. Richard doesn't need to know just yet. After we disconnected, I made notes about the conversation. Henry Dawson, controlling nearly 8% of Blackwell Industries stock, made him a significant player in any restructuring effort. His request for a meeting independent of Richard suggested the investors might be losing confidence in current leadership. Exactly the leverage I would need for the changes ahead. The following morning, I arrived at the courthouse to find Grace, already waiting, impeccably prepared as always. Richard's bringing out the big guns, she warned, nodding toward the opposing counsel, a team of attorneys from one of the city's most prestigious firms. They've filed additional motions overnight challenging Gerald's mental capacity when he executed the trustee appointment. We anticipated that, I reminded her. The documentation is solid. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours as Richard's attorneys presented arguments against my appointment. They characterized Gerald as a fading patriarch manipulated in his final months, painted me as a vindictive, soon-to-be ex-wife seeking revenge through corporate channels, and questioned my qualifications to oversee a company of Blackwell Industries' size and complexity. Throughout their presentation, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor, making notes and occasionally providing information to Grace. When it was our turn, Grace systematically dismantled their arguments with devastating efficiency. Your Honor, she concluded, the opposition has presented speculation and character attacks where facts are required. The court-appointed medical professionals certified Gerald Blackwell's capacity monthly during the period in question. Ms. Chen's qualifications as a financial investigator specializing in corporate governance are exceptional and directly relevant to the company's current needs. And regarding the pending divorce, it was initiated by Nathan Blackwell only after his grandfather began investigating company finances, timing that raises questions about the Blackwells' motivations rather than Ms. Chen's. Judge Harmon, who had listened attentively throughout, took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. The motion to remove Ms. Chen as trustee is denied, she announced. The evidence of her qualifications is compelling. The documentation of Gerald Blackwell's intentions is comprehensive, and the company's precarious financial position requires exactly the forensic expertise she provides. Furthermore, she added, looking directly at Richard's legal team, attempts to obstruct the trustee's access to company information, as documented in this filing, must cease immediately or face sanctions. As we left the courtroom, reporters, gathered on the courthouse steps, alerted to the high-profile case. Grace fielded their questions with practiced skill. My client is fulfilling her fiduciary duty as court-appointed trustee to stabilize Blackwell Industries' finances and operations, she stated. This is about preserving a company that employs hundreds of people and has been a cornerstone of this community for decades. When asked about the personal angle, my pending divorce from Nathan Blackwell, I stepped forward. My professional obligations and personal circumstances are separate matters. My commitment is to honoring Gerald Blackwell's vision for the company he founded and ensuring its continued viability. Richard and Nathan pushed past reporters without comment, their expressions thunderous. As they reached their waiting car, I overheard Richard snap at his son, "This is what happens when you bring outsiders into the family. I told you she was trouble from the beginning." My meeting with Henry Dawson that afternoon proved even more significant than I had anticipated. The investor arrived at my office precisely at 2 p.m., a distinguished man in his 60s who had built his own fortune before becoming a major Blackwell Industries shareholder. "I'll be direct, Ms. Chen," he began after declining Catherine's offer of refreshments. The investor community has concerns about Blackwell Industries that predate your appointment as trustee. Richard has been increasingly evasive about the company's financials, and rumors about liquidity issues have been circulating for months. Those concerns are well-founded, I confirmed, sharing a simplified version of our financial analysis. The company's debt is significantly higher than reported, cash flow is problematic, and several recent acquisitions are underperforming dramatically. Dawson studied the figures with a practiced eye. And what's your plan to address these issues? I outlined the restructuring strategy Gerald and I had developed: debt consolidation, divestiture of poorly performing acquisitions, operational streamlining, and a renewed focus on core manufacturing competencies rather than Richard's expansion into unrelated sectors. It's aggressive but necessary, I concluded. The alternative is a continued slide toward potential bankruptcy, which would be devastating for shareholders, Dawson mused. After a thoughtful pause, he added, I represent more than just my own interests, Ms. Chen. Several major investors have formed an informal coalition. Together, we control nearly 30% of Blackwell stock. If your plan is implemented successfully, you'll have our support. This was a game-changing development. With 30% of shareholders aligned with my restructuring efforts, Richard's ability to obstruct the process would be significantly diminished. Mr. Dawson, I appreciate your confidence. I should note that implementing these changes will likely mean temporary pain before improvement, including probable leadership changes and a potential dividend reduction while we stabilize operations. We're prepared for that reality, he assured me. Many of us have been invested in Blackwell since Gerald's leadership. We'd rather see the company return to solid footing under new management than continue this precarious path under Richard. After Dawson left, I updated Grace on this significant development. This changes the dynamics considerably, she agreed. Richard can fight your appointment all he wants, but if major shareholders are supporting your plan, his position weakens substantially. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, James Blackwell appeared at my office door. His expression was troubled, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. Do you have a few minutes? He asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. Of course. James sat down heavily. I've been reviewing the financial materials. You presented yesterday. Then I did some digging into our acquisition history. He placed a folder on my desk. I found something you should see. The folder contained internal documents related to Blackwell's acquisition of Meridian Manufacturing 3 years earlier, a transaction I had already flagged as problematic in my investigation. What James had discovered, however, added a new dimension to the story. These valuation reports were altered between the initial due diligence and the final board presentation, he explained, pointing out discrepancies in the projections. The board approved the acquisition based on manipulated data. I was on that acquisition team, and I never saw these original projections. This was significant evidence of deliberate financial manipulation, potentially reaching the level of securities fraud given that Blackwell had used the acquisition to justify a stock offering that had raised substantial capital. Who would have had the authority to make these changes? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Dad and Nathan were the final sign-offs on all acquisition materials, James confirmed. They personally presented this deal to the board. I studied the altered documentation James had provided, each page confirming what Gerald had suspected, but lacked concrete evidence to prove. This wasn't just aggressive accounting or optimistic projections. It was deliberate fraud designed to mislead the board, shareholders, and potentially regulators. James, do you understand what this means? I asked carefully. These documents could have serious legal implications for those involved. He nodded, his expression grim but resolved. I know. That's why I brought them to you instead of confronting my father directly. The company has to come first now, before family loyalty, before protecting reputations." His words surprised me. Of all the Blackwells, James had always seemed the most conventional, the loyal son content to remain in his brother's shadow while steadily handling operations. This act of whistleblowing revealed depths I hadn't recognized. "What made you decide to dig into this now?" I asked. James stared out the window at the darkening skyline. "Something grandfather said to me a few months ago. He asked if I was satisfied just following orders without questioning where those orders were leading us. It bothered me more than I let on." He turned back to me. "After yesterday's meeting, seeing the real financial picture, I couldn't just ignore what might be happening. The Meridian acquisition never made sense to me operationally, but Dad and Nathan were so insistent it was transformational. I carefully placed the documents in my secure briefcase. This helps fill in important pieces of the puzzle. I'll need to share this with the legal team, but I'll make it clear you brought this forward voluntarily." "Do what you need to do," James said, standing to leave. "Grandfather trusted you to fix this. I'm starting to understand why." After he left, I sat in the gathering darkness of Gerald's office, the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. What had begun as Gerald's concern about financial mismanagement was evolving into something potentially criminal. The altered documents created a clear timeline of deliberate deception and raised questions about what other transactions might contain similar manipulation. My phone rang, Nathan's name appearing on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Olivia, we need to talk," he began without preamble. "This situation is spiraling out of control." "I'm listening," I replied neutrally. "Meet me. For dinner. The usual place, 8 o'clock. Just you and me, no lawyers." Our usual place was Verone's, an intimate Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated numerous anniversaries and special occasions. The choice was deliberate, an attempt to leverage nostalgia and personal connection. "This isn't a personal matter anymore, Nathan. If you want to discuss Blackwell Industries, it needs to happen with legal counsel present." "For God's sake, Olivia, you're still my wife," he snapped, frustration evident. "Can't we just talk like normal people? This divorce was Dad's idea. You know that. I never wanted it." The claim was so blatantly revisionist that it momentarily left me speechless. When I'd regained my composure, I replied, "You didn't just agree to the divorce, Nathan. You emptied our accounts, tried to saddle me with your gambling debts, and offered a settlement that would have left me with almost nothing. Those were choices you made." "I was under enormous pressure," he argued. "Dad made it clear the only way to protect my position in the company was to make a clean break. I didn't have options." "We always have options," I corrected him. "You chose your family's approval and your corporate position over our marriage. That was your decision, and now we both have to live with the consequences." After a tense silence, Nathan tried a different approach. "Fine, then let's meet with the lawyers present. Tomorrow morning. There's a way through this that works for everyone." "I'll have Grace check her availability and get back to you," I agreed, ending the call, before he could continue. I immediately called Grace to brief her on the conversation and the documents James had provided. "This changes the dynamics considerably," she observed. "With evidence of potential securities fraud, Nathan may be looking to make a deal that minimizes his personal exposure." "That was my read as well," I agreed. "Let's meet him tomorrow, but with our eyes wide open." The following morning, Nathan arrived at the meeting with not only his divorce attorney but also a high-powered criminal defense lawyer, confirmation that he understood the gravity of the situation. Grace had brought her colleague who specialized in securities law, creating a balanced representation. After preliminary formalities, Nathan's criminal defense attorney, Martin Reeves, took the lead. "Ms. Chen, my client understands you've come into possession of certain company documents that might be subject to misinterpretation when viewed without proper context." Grace raised an eyebrow at the careful phrasing. If you're referring to the falsified Meridian acquisition valuations, I assure you they're quite clear, even without context. Nathan leaned forward. Those projections were revised based on additional data that became available during the final due diligence phase. There was nothing improper about the process. I opened my portfolio and slid copies of the emails James had provided across the table. These internal communications tell a different story, Nathan. The revisions were made after the due diligence was complete, with explicit instructions to adjust the projections to support the purchase price. And that's not additional data, that's manufacturing numbers to justify a predetermined outcome. The color drained from Nathan's face as he realized James had provided me with more than just the valuation documents. His attorneys requested a brief recess to confer privately, which Grace readily granted. When they returned, Reeves's tone had shifted noticeably. My client is prepared to cooperate fully with the company restructuring efforts in exchange for certain considerations. We're listening, Grace replied. Mr. Blackwell will provide complete documentation of all acquisition valuations conducted under similar methodology, assist in identifying any other potential financial irregularities, and support Ms. Chen's appointment as trustee without further challenge, Reeves outlined. In exchange, he seeks immunity from any potential criminal charges, a fair division of marital assets in the divorce proceedings, and a path to eventual rehabilitation within the company structure. It was a significant offer. Nathan's cooperation could accelerate the restructuring process substantially and help identify other problematic transactions before they created additional crises. However, the request for complete immunity was premature given that we didn't yet know the full extent of the financial manipulation. After consulting briefly with Grace, I countered, "We can agree to recommend leniency commensurate with the value of Mr. Blackwell's cooperation, a standard division of legitimate marital assets after a full accounting of misappropriated funds, and consideration for a future role in the restructured company if appropriate safeguards are established. Complete immunity is not on the table until we understand the full scope of the issues." 3 hours of intense negotiation followed, resulting in a framework agreement that would allow Nathan to avoid the most serious potential consequences in exchange for his full cooperation. By early afternoon, he had signed the preliminary agreement and committed to providing a complete accounting of all questionable transactions the following day. As we left the conference room, Nathan asked for a moment alone. Grace gave me a questioning look, but I nodded my assurance. 5 minutes, she agreed, stepping outside with the other attorneys. Once we were alone, Nathan's carefully maintained composure crumbled. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice hollow. "The first adjustment to the numbers seemed so small, just a slight revision to make the deal work. Then it became easier each time, especially when Dad made it clear that meeting the growth targets was the only measure of success that mattered." "What about us, Nathan? Was I just collateral damage in your father's plan?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I convinced myself it was temporary, that once we got through the crisis, I could make things right with you. I never imagined Grandfather was working with you, that you'd end up in this position." "That's the problem," I observed quietly. "You never really saw me, who I am, what I value, what I'm capable of. To you and your family, I was just an accessory, never a full partner." He had no response to that truth, and I didn't need one. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "For what it's worth, I am sorry, Olivia. Not just for the financial mess, but for failing you as a husband." I paused at the door. "Thank you for saying that. I hope your cooperation helps save the company your grandfather built. That would mean something to him." The next phase moved quickly. With Nathan's cooperation, we identified 6 additional acquisitions with manipulated valuations, 3 questionable, loans secured with overvalued collateral, and a pattern of revenue recognition practices that had artificially inflated quarterly results. Each discovery confirmed Gerald's suspicions, and validated the urgency of his actions before his death. James proved invaluable during this process, using his operational knowledge to help identify discrepancies between reported performance and actual results. His willingness to place company welfare above family loyalty earned him respect from the board members not aligned with Richard, a growing contingent as the true financial picture emerged. Richard, meanwhile, refused to cooperate, maintaining that all financial decisions had been sound and approved through proper channels. His continued obstruction only hardened the resolve of increasingly concerned board members and major shareholders. 2 weeks after Nathan's agreement to cooperate, I presented a comprehensive restructuring plan to the board. The 4-hour meeting was tense but productive, with most directors recognizing the urgency of the situation. This plan requires difficult decisions, I acknowledged as I outlined the necessary steps: divesting unprofitable acquisitions, closing underperforming facilities, restructuring debt, and, most controversially, replacing key executives who had been complicit in the financial manipulation. The most significant change, I continued, would be Richard Blackwell transitioning from CEO to an advisory role while we implement these changes and restore financial stability. Richard exploded at this recommendation. "This is outrageous! You have no authority to remove me as CEO. I built this company into what it is today." "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwell," Henry Dawson interjected, "the company you've built is on the verge of collapse due to unsustainable debt and questionable accounting. The shareholder coalition I represent fully supports Ms. Chen's recommendation for a leadership change." After heated debate, the board voted 8-3 to approve the restructuring plan in its entirety, including Richard's reassignment. His face flushed with fury as the chairman announced the result. "This isn't over," he threatened as he gathered his materials. "The Blackwell name is on this company for a reason. You'll regret this decision." After Richard stormed out, the board continued with the practical details of implementing the restructuring plan. By meeting's end, I had been named interim CEO while maintaining my trustee role, a dual position that would allow me to execute the necessary changes with full authority. As news of the board's decision reached employees, I knew clear communication would be essential to prevent panic and maintain operational continuity. I spent the remainder of the day drafting a company-wide message with the communications team, emphasizing that while changes were coming, the restructuring was designed to strengthen the company for long-term stability rather than prepare it for sale or liquidation. That evening, as I finally prepared to leave the office, Eleanor Blackwell appeared unannounced for the second time since my appointment as trustee. Her expression was unreadable as Catherine showed her in. "I won't take much of your time," she began, declining my offer to sit. "I simply wanted to deliver this personally." She placed a small velvet box on my desk. Inside was the emerald ring Nathan had given me when he proposed, the ring I had returned to him when he served me with divorce papers. "This belonged to Gerald's mother," Eleanor explained. "When Nathan wanted to propose to you, Gerald insisted you should have it against my objections. I thought you were wrong for our family, too independent, too unwilling to adapt to our ways." I remained silent, uncertain where this unexpected conversation was heading. "Gerald told me something then that I dismissed," she continued. "He said the company would need exactly your kind of independence one day, that the Blackwell tendency toward conformity and consensus could become our greatest weakness." Her voice faltered slightly. "I should have listened to him more carefully." "Why are you giving me this now?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because Gerald was right about you and I was wrong," she said simply. "You could have exposed Richard and Nathan's actions publicly, destroyed the company's reputation beyond repair. Instead, you've worked to save it, even knowing what they did to you personally." She gestured to the ring. "This doesn't belong to Nathan or to me. Gerald would want you to have it, not as a Blackwell wife, but as the person who honored his legacy when his own son and grandson failed to do so. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I thought I understood about Eleanor Blackwell, that I found myself momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I finally managed. "That means more than you know." After she left, I held the emerald ring, feeling its weight and history. It represented not just my past with Nathan, but a connection to Gerald and his vision for the company, a vision I was now responsible for restoring. The next morning, I arrived at Blackwell Industries to find Richard's office empty, his personal items already removed. The speed of his departure surprised me, but Catherine explained that he had returned late the previous evening to clear out his belongings, telling security he had no intention of witnessing the destruction of his legacy. My first official act as interim CEO was to call a leadership meeting with all department heads and senior managers. Nearly 30 people gathered in the main conference room, their expressions ranging from anxious to curious to openly hostile. "I know many of you have questions and concerns about the changes happening at Blackwell Industries," I began. "You've heard rumors, seen board announcements, and witnessed leadership transitions, all in a very compressed time frame. Today, I want to provide clarity about where we are and where we're going." For the next hour, I presented an unvarnished assessment of the company's situation, the unsustainable debt, the operational inefficiencies, the accounting practices that had masked growing problems. Rather than sugarcoating the challenges, I emphasized the fundamental strengths that remained: skilled employees, valuable manufacturing capabilities, and products that still commanded market respect. "The restructuring ahead will be difficult," I acknowledged. "Some operations will be consolidated, certain recent acquisitions divested, and yes, there will be some position eliminations. But these changes aren't arbitrary cost-cutting. They're strategic realignment to refocus on what Blackwell Industries does best." I then outlined the specific initiatives that would begin immediately: a review of all product lines to identify core strengths and peripheral activities, an operational audit to eliminate redundancies, and new financial reporting protocols to ensure transparency going forward. "I can't promise there won't be painful decisions ahead," I concluded. "What I can promise is that those decisions will be made transparently, communicated clearly, and implemented fairly. Gerald Blackwell built this company on quality, integrity, and respect for every employee's contribution. We're going to restore those values while adapting to today's market realities." After addressing numerous questions, some pointed but all fair, I ended the meeting by emphasizing that my door, Gerald's former office, was open to anyone with concerns, suggestions, or insights that could help strengthen the restructuring efforts. As people filed out, James lingered behind. "That was impressive," he said once we were alone. "Honest without being alarmist, firm without being dictatorial, the opposite of how Dad would have handled it. Different challenges require different approaches," I replied. "Your father's style worked during expansion. Restructuring demands something else." James nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about my role in all this. I was complicit through inaction, even if I wasn't actively involved in the manipulation." "What matters is what you're doing now," I pointed out. "Your cooperation has been invaluable." "I want to do more," he said with unexpected determination. "I understand the operations side better than anyone. Let me help implement the restructuring at the factory level, work with the teams directly. They'll resist changes from unknown consultants, but they know me." His offer was exactly what the restructuring effort needed: someone with deep operational knowledge who could translate strategic directives into practical implementation. Just as importantly, having a Blackwell family member visibly supporting the changes would help mitigate concerns that the company was abandoning its heritage. "That would be tremendously helpful," I agreed. "Let's map out how that could work." Over the next 2 weeks, we established a restructuring implementation team with James as operational lead. His involvement proved crucial in identifying practical efficiencies that outside consultants might have missed, and in maintaining workforce morale during uncertain times. The most difficult day came when we announced the first round of position eliminations, primarily duplicative roles created through acquisitions and a layer of middle management that had grown disproportionately under Richard's expansion strategy. Though necessary, delivering this news to affected employees tested my resolve and leadership approach. I insisted on being personally present for the announcements, explaining the rationale behind the decisions and detailing the severance packages. We had designed to be more generous than industry standards. Rather than allowing affected employees to be immediately escorted out as was typical corporate practice, we provided them with 2 weeks of transition time, dignity in their departure, and comprehensive outplacement services. This approach costs more initially, I explained to concerned board members, but it demonstrates our commitment to treating people respectfully even during difficult transitions. That message resonates with the employees who remain and with our business partners watching how we handle this restructuring. By the end of the first month as interim CEO, we had begun to see measurable progress. 3 underperforming acquisitions had been divested, returning much-needed capital to shore. Up the balance sheet, 2 manufacturing facilities had been consolidated, eliminating redundant overhead while retaining most production workers. And a new, transparent financial reporting system had been implemented with strict controls to prevent manipulation. Most significantly, we had negotiated revised terms with our primary lenders, using the comprehensive restructuring plan to demonstrate a credible path to financial stability. The breathing room these negotiations provided was crucial to implementing changes without the immediate pressure of debt payments forcing hasty decisions. One morning, as I reviewed the latest financial projections with our CFO, Catherine interrupted with an urgent message. "Ms. Chen, Nathan Blackwell is here to see you. He says it's important." I hadn't seen Nathan since our negotiation session weeks earlier, though he had continued providing documentation as agreed. His appearance now was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. The restructuring was moving forward, and he would naturally be concerned about his future role. "Send him in," I told Catherine, closing the financial reports spread across my desk. Nathan entered hesitantly, looking markedly different from the confident executive who had once dominated boardroom discussions. His expensive suit hung slightly, loose on his frame, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested ongoing stress. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, taking the chair across from me. "I've completed the final documentation you requested about the Westridge acquisition." I accepted the folder he offered. "This should help us determine whether to retain or divest that business unit. Your cooperation has been helpful, Nathan." He nodded, but seemed distracted, his gaze moving around the office that had once been his grandfather's and now was mine. "It's strange seeing someone else here," he admitted, "though grandfather would probably approve of how you've managed everything." "I hope so," I replied. "His vision for the company is what's guiding these changes." "I've been meeting with my therapist," Nathan said, changing the subject abruptly. "Working through my issues with gambling, with needing my father's approval, with how I treated you. It's been illuminating." "I'm glad you're getting help," I said sincerely. Though our marriage was over, I didn't wish him continued suffering. "I know I have no right to ask," he continued, "but I'm wondering if there might eventually be a place for me in the restructured company. Not in leadership," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Something where I can contribute without authority, over financial decisions." Nathan's request hung in the air between us, fraught with complicated history and uncertain possibilities. I studied him carefully, looking for signs of his father's manipulative influence or his own previous entitlement. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine humility and what appeared to be sincere remorse. "That's a significant request. Nathan," I finally said, "the restructuring is still in its early stages, and trust has to be rebuilt on multiple levels. The board, the employees, the shareholders, they've all been affected by the actions you were part of. He nodded, accepting. The difficult truth without defensiveness. I understand. I'm not asking for an immediate position or special treatment. I just want to know if redemption might be possible someday. His question touched on something fundamental about the vision Gerald and I had discussed for the company. Not just financial restructuring, but cultural transformation. Creating an organization where accountability and growth were equally valued would mean establishing pathways for people to learn from mistakes and contribute in new ways. I believe in second chances, I told him carefully, but they have to be earned through consistent actions, not just words. If you're serious about contributing to the company's recovery, we can discuss potential paths forward once you've completed your therapeutic program and fulfilled all the terms of our agreement. Relief flickered across his face. That's more than I expected. Thank you. As he prepared to leave, Nathan paused at the door. Mom told me she gave you grandmother's ring. Yes, I confirmed, uncertain where this was heading. She was right. To do that, he said simply, it belongs with someone who upholds what it represents, integrity even when it's difficult. I never deserved to give it to you in the first place. After he left, I sat reflecting on the unexpected encounter. Nathan's apparent transformation seemed genuine, though only time would reveal its depth and durability. More surprising was my own response, the absence of bitterness or desire for retribution that had been replaced by a measured willingness to consider redemption. Perhaps that was part of my own growth through this crucible. The next milestone in the restructuring process was presenting our quarterly results to the board, the first comprehensive financial report since the leadership transition. The numbers told a story of painful but necessary progress. Revenue was down due to divestitures, but core operational efficiency had improved, cash flow had stabilized, and debt levels had begun to decrease for the first time in years. These results won't make headlines in the business press, I acknowledged as I concluded the presentation, but they represent foundational improvement in the company's financial health. We're treating the disease now, not just masking the symptoms. Henry Dawson spoke for many board members when he responded, "This is exactly the kind of straight talk and realistic progress we've been missing. No financial engineering, no artificial growth, just honest assessment and meaningful improvement." After the board meeting, James and I walked through the main production facility, where the operational changes were most visible. Workflow had been reorganized to eliminate bottlenecks, equipment maintenance schedules optimized, and quality control processes strengthened. The results were evident in both productivity metrics and employee engagement. The team supervisors are starting to bring forward their own improvement ideas, James noted as we observed a recently modified assembly process. That rarely happened under Dad's management. Everyone was too afraid of suggesting anything might not be perfect. That's exactly the cultural shift we need, I replied. The best solutions often come from the people closest to the work. As we continued our tour, line workers greeted James with familiar ease, but regarded me with cautious respect. A reminder that while I had authority as CEO, I hadn't yet earned their trust the way someone who had worked alongside them for years had done. One veteran machinist, however, approached directly. "Ms. Chen? I'm Frank Mercer, 32 years with Blackwell." He extended a weathered hand, which I shook firmly. "Just wanted to say some of us old-timers appreciate what you're doing. Reminds us of how Mr. Gerald ran things. Straight talk, no games." "Thank you, Frank. That means a lot." "Don't get me wrong," he continued candidly. "We were plenty worried when the changes started. But you've kept the promises about being honest with us, even when the news wasn't good. That counts for something on the floor." His endorsement, freely given from someone with no agenda beyond speaking his truth, felt more significant than any board approval or shareholder support. It suggested the restructuring wasn't just changing financial statements, but beginning to restore the company culture Gerald had valued. As we were completing our facility tour, Catherine called with urgent news. Richard Blackwell had filed a lawsuit challenging both my appointment as trustee and the board's decision to name me interim CEO. His complaint alleged conflicts of interest, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate governance violations. Grace called minutes later. "This was predictable," she assured me. "Richard's trying to create enough legal chaos to undermine confidence in the restructuring. The claims are weak, but responding will consume time and resources." "Exactly what we don't need during this critical phase," I observed, frustration evident in my voice. "Is there any way to expedite the proceedings or get the case dismissed?" "I'm already drafting our response." Given Judge Harmon's previous rulings and the clear documentation of Gerald's intentions, we have strong grounds to request expedited review and potentially summary dismissal. The lawsuit created exactly the distraction Richard had intended, forcing me to spend precious time with legal counsel when my focus should have been on implementing key restructuring initiatives. More concerning was the uncertainty it created among employees, suppliers, and business partners, many of whom began asking questions about leadership stability and the company's direction. I decided to address the issue directly, calling another company-wide meeting to discuss the lawsuit and its implications. Transparency had been our approach throughout the restructuring, and maintaining it during this challenge seemed essential. "Yes, Richard Blackwell has filed a lawsuit challenging my authority as trustee and CEO," I confirmed to the assembled employees. "No, this doesn't change our restructuring plans or the progress we've made together. Our legal team is responding, and we have strong grounds to believe the case lacks merit." Rather than dismissing concerns, I acknowledge them directly. I understand this creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is the last thing we need right now. But remember, we've already navigated more significant challenges together over these past months. This is one more obstacle we'll overcome through the same approach: honest communication, focused execution, and commitment to the company's long-term health. The meeting seemed to stabilize morale, but Richard's legal maneuver had another, more immediate consequence. Potential business partners became hesitant to finalize agreements while leadership questions remained unresolved. This timing was particularly problematic as we were in final negotiations with Matsuda Corporation, a Japanese manufacturer whose partnership was crucial to our international expansion strategy. Kenji Matsuda, the company's CEO, requested a private meeting to discuss his concerns before proceeding with our agreement. As a traditional business leader who placed immense value on stability and clear succession, the Blackwell family drama clearly troubled him. "Ms. Chen," he began when we met at his hotel suite, foregoing his usual formal tea ceremony in favor of direct conversation, "my board members have expressed serious reservations about proceeding while these legal challenges remain unresolved. I understand their concerns, Mr. Matsuda. Uncertainty is never conducive to major business decisions." He nodded appreciatively at my directness. "The restructuring plans you've shared are impressive. Exactly the kind of strategic realignment we believe Blackwell Industries needs to become a strong international partner. But we must know who will see these plans through to completion." Rather than offering empty reassurances, I decided on a more substantive approach. "Mr. Matsuda, would you be willing to meet with our board chairman and key shareholders? They could provide perspective on governance continuity, regardless of any leadership transitions." The meeting was arranged for the following day, with Henry Dawson and 2 other major shareholders joining us to discuss the company's commitment to the restructuring plan and partnership strategy, regardless of who ultimately occupied the CEO position. Their unified support for the strategic direction, even while acknowledging the legal uncertainties, seemed to satisfy Matsuda's concerns. "A company is more than one leader," he observed as we concluded the meeting. "You have built consensus for your vision, Ms. Chen. That is more valuable than any individual authority." With Matsuda's concerns addressed, the partnership agreement moved forward, providing Blackwell Industries with crucial access to Asian markets and advanced manufacturing technologies. The successful negotiation, despite Richard's interference, demonstrated that the company's renewal had momentum beyond legal challenges. Meanwhile, the court scheduled an expedited hearing on Richard's lawsuit, recognizing the potential business impact of prolonged uncertainty. The 2 weeks before the hearing were intense, preparing comprehensive documentation of the restructuring progress, gathering affidavits from board members and shareholders supporting the current direction, and developing contingency plans should the ruling not go in our favor. The night before the hearing, I worked late in Gerald's office, reviewing our legal strategy one final time. The space had become a sanctuary during the tumultuous restructuring period, its wood-paneled walls and historical photos a constant reminder of the company's roots and purpose. The intercom buzzed, security informing me that Eleanor Blackwell was requesting access to the executive floor. Though surprised by her unannounced visit, especially given the pending litigation her husband had initiated, I instructed them to allow her up. She entered carrying a worn leather portfolio, her expression somber but determined. I apologize for the late visit, but this couldn't wait until after tomorrow's hearing. I gestured to the sitting area, and she took a seat, placing the portfolio carefully on the coffee table between us. Richard doesn't know I'm here, she continued. He wouldn't approve, but I've spent too many years prioritizing his approval over doing what's right. She opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed papers and aging photographs. These are Gerald's original notes and planning documents from when he founded the company. I found them in our home safe while looking for something else. She selected one document and handed it to me, a handwritten mission statement dated nearly 50 years earlier. Gerald's elegant script outlined a vision strikingly similar to the restructuring principles we were now implementing: quality manufacturing, employee respect, community responsibility, and financial sustainability over rapid growth. When Gerald started Blackwell Industries, these values weren't corporate buzzwords. They were genuinely how he intended to build the business, Eleanor explained. Over time, Richard's emphasis on expansion and acquisition overshadowed them. I watched it happen and said nothing, convinced that business evolution was necessary. She continued sorting through the documents, selecting specific items with purpose. This is what I really came to show you. She handed me a legal agreement from 20 years earlier, a shareholder arrangement between Gerald and Richard that I hadn't seen in any of the company records. This grants Gerald's designated successor trustee full authority to implement restructuring if certain financial risk thresholds were breached, she explained. Richard thought Gerald had forgotten about it as he aged. Clearly, he hadn't. The document provided explicit legal authority for exactly the actions I had taken as trustee, circumventing many of Richard's current legal arguments. Its absence from company records suggested deliberate concealment. Why are you sharing this now? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Because tomorrow isn't just about who controls Blackwell Industries, she replied. It's about whether Gerald's life's work stands for something beyond profit and prestige. I've spent decades as Richard's wife and Nathan's mother, supporting their ambitions without questioning the cost. I won't compound that mistake by withholding evidence that could preserve what Gerald built. The revelation of her inner conflict between family loyalty and deeper values was unexpected but illuminating. Eleanor had always seemed the consummate corporate wife whose primary purpose was advancing family interests. This glimpse of her independent moral compass challenged my assumptions about her character. Will you testify about this document if needed? I asked. She straightened her shoulders, resolution evident in her posture. Yes. I've arranged for my own attorney to be present tomorrow. Richard will see it as betrayal, but I see it as honoring Gerald's true legacy. After she left, I immediately called Grace to brief her on this significant development. This changes our entire legal strategy, she confirmed after reviewing the document. We'll need to amend our filings first thing tomorrow, but this essentially negates Richard's primary arguments. The courtroom the next morning was tense with anticipation. Richard had arrived with an expanded legal team, clearly prepared for a prolonged battle. He barely acknowledged Eleanor, who sat not beside him but in a neutral middle section with her own attorney, a public signal that couldn't be missed by anyone familiar with the Blackwell family dynamics. Judge Harmon, who had handled the earlier proceedings regarding my trustee appointment, reviewed the newly submitted documents with careful attention. Richard's attorneys objected strenuously to their last-minute introduction, but the judge overruled them, noting the direct relevance to the case at hand. Your Honor, Richard's lead attorney argued, even if this agreement was valid when executed, it was superseded by subsequent corporate governance changes as the company evolved from a privately held business to its current structure. On the contrary, Grace countered, the shareholder agreement was explicitly designed to survive corporate restructuring, as stated in Section 7. It represented Mr. Gerald Blackwell's insurance policy against exactly the kind of financial management that subsequently occurred under Mr. Richard Blackwell's leadership. After hearing arguments from both sides, Judge Harmon called for Eleanor's testimony regarding the document's provenance and her knowledge of Gerald's intentions. With remarkable composure, Eleanor explained how Gerald had always maintained certain legal safeguards independent of the company's official governance structure, precisely because he feared the direction Richard might take if given unchecked authority. My husband viewed these as unnecessary constraints on business growth, she testified. But Gerald insisted they remain in place as a form of corporate conscience, even if never activated. Richard's expression darkened as his wife's testimony continued, the public contradiction of his narrative clearly infuriating him. When it was his turn to testify, his carefully cultivated executive persona cracked, revealing the entitlement and anger beneath. This company exists because of my leadership, he insisted. My father started it, but I built it into what it is today. This outsider, he gestured dismissively toward me, has no right to undo my life's work based on an old man's misguided concerns and outdated agreement. His description of his own father as an old man with misguided concerns did more damage to his case than any legal argument could have done. The contempt in his voice revealed exactly why Gerald had created the legal safeguards now being enforced. After a brief recess, Judge Harmon delivered her ruling with characteristic directness. The court finds the shareholder agreement valid and applicable to the current circumstances. Ms. Chen's appointment as trustee is affirmed, as are the subsequent board actions installing her as interim CEO. Mr. Blackwell's petition is denied in its entirety. She continued with a personal observation rarely offered from the bench. This court notes that the financial evidence presented demonstrates precisely the conditions Mr. Gerald Blackwell sought to prevent through this agreement. Rather than challenging these corrective actions, Mr. Richard Blackwell might better serve the company by supporting the restructuring efforts now underway. As we left the courtroom, reporters again gathered for statements. Richard pushed past them without comment, his attorney offering only a terse, "We're considering our appeal options," before following his client. When approached for my response, I kept my comments focused on the company rather than the personal victory. Today's ruling provides clarity and stability for Blackwell Industries as we continue implementing the strategic restructuring. Our focus remains on strengthening operations, serving customers effectively, and creating sustainable value for all stakeholders. Eleanor approached as the media dispersed, her expression a complex mixture of relief and sadness. "You handled that gracefully," she observed. No triumphalism, no personal comments about Richard. "This was never about personal vindication," I replied. "It's about honoring Gerald's vision for the company and the people who depend on it." She nodded thoughtfully. Richard won't see it that way. For him, business has always been personal, an extension of his identity and authority. Losing control of the company is losing part of himself. "I understand that," I acknowledged. which is why we've consistently offered him a continuing role that respects his historical contribution while implementing necessary changes. He won't accept it, she said with the weariness of someone who had witnessed his stubbornness for decades. At least not initially, but perhaps in time, when he sees the company stabilizing, his perspective might shift. In the days following the court victory, we accelerated the restructuring initiatives that had been partially suspended during the legal uncertainty. The most significant was a comprehensive review of the company's product lines, identifying core offerings that aligned with our manufacturing strengths while phasing out peripheral products that consumed resources disproportionate to their returns. James again proved invaluable in this process, using his operational knowledge to distinguish between products that genuinely required elimination and those that simply needed process improvements to become profitable. His balanced approach preserved important engineering capabilities while reducing complexity that had accumulated through years of undisciplined expansion. 3 months into my tenure as interim CEO, the board conducted its first formal evaluation of the restructuring progress. The financial improvements were measurable. Debt reduced by 22%, operational costs decreased by 17%, and core product profitability increased by 9%. More subjectively but equally important, employee surveys showed growing confidence in the company's direction and appreciation for the transparent communication throughout the difficult changes. The numbers tell a compelling story of improvement, the board chairman noted as we reviewed the quarterly results. But equally impressive is how you've managed this transition. The workforce reduction was handled with dignity, the strategic refocusing with clarity, and the cultural shift with consistency. Following the positive evaluation, the board voted unanimously to remove interim from my title, confirming me as CEO with a 3-year contract to complete the restructuring and establish a sustainable growth strategy. The vote of confidence was professionally gratifying, but also personally meaningful. Acknowledgement that my leadership was valued for its own merit, not just as an emergency intervention. That evening, I called Zoe to share the news. Our friendship had been a constant throughout the tumultuous period, her unwavering support providing perspective when corporate challenges and personal conflicts threatened to become overwhelming. From outcast wife to confirmed CEO, she observed, with characteristic directness. That's quite a journey in less than a year. It still feels surreal sometimes, I admitted, especially when I think about where I was when Nathan first told me about the divorce, feeling betrayed, financially, vulnerable, uncertain about my future. That's what makes this so perfect, Zoe replied. They tried to discard you with nothing, not recognizing that your greatest asset was never in those joint accounts. It was your integrity and professional skill. Those are things they couldn't take away, and ultimately what saved their company. Her perspective captured the essential irony of the situation. The very qualities the Blackwells had marginalized during my marriage had become the foundation for salvaging Gerald's legacy from his son and grandson's mismanagement. The next phase of the restructuring focused on rebuilding rather than simply repairing, establishing new product development processes, modernizing manufacturing capabilities, and creating governance structures that would prevent future financial manipulation. This constructive work proved more energizing than the earlier crisis management, allowing creativity and innovation to re-emerge in a company that had become rigidly hierarchical under Richard's leadership. 6 months after the court ruling, with the company's trajectory firmly established, Nathan requested another meeting. He had completed his therapeutic program and fulfilled all obligations under our agreement, providing crucial documentation that had accelerated the restructuring process. I've been offered a position with a technology startup in Seattle, he explained when we met. Something completely different from Blackwell Industries, developing educational software for children. No financial responsibilities, just product development work. That sounds like a positive direction, I observed. A fresh start away from family expectations. He nodded. That's exactly why I'm considering it. But before I make that decision, I wanted to ask if you still see any potential role for me here. Not in leadership, he added quickly, but perhaps in product development or customer relations, areas where I could contribute without access to financial systems. The request deserved careful consideration. Nathan had indeed fulfilled his obligations under our agreement, and his ongoing cooperation had proven valuable. The medical documentation confirmed he was maintaining his recovery from gambling addiction, and his therapist had provided a carefully worded assessment of his progress in addressing the personality traits that had contributed to his ethical failures. I believe second chances should be earned, not simply granted, I told him after thoughtful consideration. Your cooperation has been consistent and valuable. If you genuinely want to contribute to Blackwell Industries' recovery, we could discuss a limited role in new product development, with appropriate oversight and restrictions. Relief and gratitude crossed his face. That's more than I expected. Thank you. This isn't sentimentality, Nathan. It's a practical assessment. You have knowledge and skills that could benefit the company, provided the right structure is in place. We established parameters for a potential position, reporting to James rather than directly to me. No financial authority, comprehensive monitoring protocols, and a 6-month probationary period. The arrangement would require board approval, but with James's support and Nathan's demonstrated cooperation during the restructuring, that seemed achievable. As Nathan prepared to leave, I asked the question that had lingered since his betrayal. Why did you do it, Nathan? Not just the financial manipulation, but choosing your father's approval over our marriage, over your own integrity? He considered the question with the thoughtfulness that therapy had apparently helped him develop. I've spent months trying to answer that for myself, he admitted. The simplest explanation is that I never developed an identity separate from being Richard Blackwell's son and heir. My value was measured by his approval, and I would do anything to maintain it. He continued after a reflective pause. The more complicated truth is that I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I convinced myself it was temporary, necessary, justified by circumstances. Each compromise made the next one easier, until ethical boundaries became completely blurred. His self-awareness represented genuine growth, though it came too late for our marriage. I appreciate your honesty, I told him. It helps me understand what happened between us. For what it's worth, he added as he reached the door, watching you transform the company these past months has been humbling. You've accomplished what I always talked about but never had the courage to actually do, challenging my father's approach and returning to grandfather's values. 1 year after Gerald's death, we held a company-wide gathering to commemorate his legacy and celebrate the successful restructuring of Blackwell Industries. The event took place in the main manufacturing facility rather than corporate headquarters, symbolizing the renewed emphasis on the company's production capabilities and workforce. Employees from all levels and departments attended, along with board members, key business partners, and community representatives. Even Richard made an appearance, though he remained distant and spoke to few people. Eleanor, however, engaged actively with longtime employees, many of whom shared stories about Gerald's leadership during the company's early years. As the appointed time arrived, I stepped to the podium to address the assembled group. 1 year ago, Blackwell Industries stood at a crossroads. Burdened by unsustainable debt, operational inefficiencies, and management practices that had strayed from our founder's vision, we faced an uncertain future. I paused, looking out at the diverse gathering that represented everyone who had contributed to the company's recovery. Today, we stand on solid ground again. Not because of financial engineering or quick fixes, but because we collectively returned to the principles Gerald Blackwell established when he founded this company: quality manufacturing, employee respect, community responsibility, and financial sustainability. The subsequent presentation detailed the measurable improvements across all aspects of the business. Debt reduced by 47%, operational efficiency increased by 23%, employee satisfaction scores at their highest level in a decade, and a healthy pipeline of new products developed under the more focused strategy. These achievements belong to everyone in this room, I emphasized. From production line workers who identified process improvements to administrative staff who streamlined procedures to engineers who refocused our product development, this recovery has been a collective effort. As I concluded my remarks, I revealed the final element of our commemoration, a newly established Richard Blackwell Innovation Center that would house research and development efforts while providing educational opportunities for employees and community members interested in manufacturing technologies. Gerald believed that companies should contribute to their communities beyond merely providing employment, I explained. This center will honor that belief by creating pathways for people to develop skills, explore new technologies, and potentially join our workforce with advanced capabilities. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from longtime employees who remembered Gerald's commitment to community engagement and workforce development. Even Richard's typically impassive expression showed grudging approval of this tribute to his father. As the formal program concluded and people mingled over refreshments, I found myself standing beside Eleanor, watching the interactions across the manufacturing floor. "Gerald would be proud," she said quietly. "Not just of the financial recovery, but of how you've accomplished it, with transparency and respect for people at all levels." "That was always the goal," I replied. "Saving the company wasn't just about numbers on balance sheets. It was about preserving what made Blackwell Industries worth saving in the first place." She nodded thoughtfully. "When Nathan first brought you home, I saw only what didn't fit our expectations: your independent career, your unwillingness to simply adapt to our ways. I never considered that those very qualities might someday save Gerald's legacy." Her candor deserved reciprocal honesty. "I spent years feeling like an outsider in your family, never quite measuring up to unspoken expectations. If someone had told me then that I would eventually become CEO of Blackwell Industries, I would have thought it absurd." "Life has a way of revealing what truly matters," Eleanor observed. For Gerald, it was building something meaningful that provided value to customers and dignity to employees. For Richard, it became growth and prestige at any cost. The difference shaped both the company's crisis and its recovery. As the event wound down, I took a final moment alone in the manufacturing area, listening to the subdued hum of machinery that represented both the company's historical foundation and its future potential. The journey from discarded wife to company leader had been neither planned nor expected, but it had revealed strengths I might never have discovered under different circumstances. The next board meeting would focus on long-term growth strategy now that the restructuring was substantially complete. The path ahead contained both challenges and opportunities, but the company now stood on solid ground, its foundations restored, and its direction clarified. What had begun with Gerald's recognition of my professional integrity had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. Not just the salvaging of a company in crisis, but its transformation into an organization that honored its founding principles while adapting to contemporary realities. The debt Nathan had left me with had become the catalyst for claiming my own power and purpose, turning betrayal into unexpected opportunity. I smiled at the ultimate irony. The Blackwells had tried to discard me with nothing but debt, never imagining that one day I would be responsible for preserving the legacy they had nearly destroyed. The journey had transformed not just the company but me as well, revealing resilience and leadership capabilities I might never have discovered without that crucial moment of crisis and choice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.